The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. We conclude that the Human Codronite War was a turning point for the Commonwealth in this timeline. Advise further examination of the strategy and tactics of the Codronite people. This will be necessary to achieve a complete view of this timeline. Additionally, Ministry field agents must use caution as this timeline hosts another HHH infestation. Lord Eustace Charleston, one of the greatest human scientists and a prominent member of the Royal Geographical Society, was on board the HMS Enterprise, its destination Alpha Centauri. And in the year 2200, on the 10th day of the 5th month, the first humans arrived in a solar system that was not their own. A greater discovery was to come before the year was out, when not only was the first human habitable planet beyond Earth discovered, but on it, so was life. Extraterrestrial life. A great discovery for humanity, except for those of the Commonwealth Independence Party. But their voices were drowned out as Alpha Centauri was confirmed as the first viable target for space colonization. Humans would finally extend their reach beyond Sol. As dawn rose on a system spanning humanity, the brightest minds of the British Commonwealth formed a committee to create a motto for their imminent expansion. Drawing on the dark days of the Empire, they decided on "The supermassive black hole never sets on the British Commonwealth." Both technically right and nonsensical. It was exactly what was expected of a committee. Between 2201 and 2203, in the early days of this empire's spacefaring activities, the remnants of an ancient alien civilization were discovered within the Alpha Centauri system. Dating the ruins suggested the Alpha Centaurians went extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. And if the immense and unnatural planetary scarring on Alpha Centauri 4 that had confused geologists was anything to go by, they had spacefaring and weapons technology far beyond that of the Commonwealth. It was suggested that the extinction of the Alpha Centaurians could be similarly attributed. The Royal Geographical Society sought new funding in order to continue their promotion of science the world over. The British Commonwealth asked them to focus on discovery. This pushed the technological research to new heights, giving scientists an easier time than ever to discover new wonders. More funding was secured within 9 months, but for a specific purpose. Member of Parliament Ignatius Diebold Constantine wanted the society to colonise everything. In 2202, a new signal was tracked to the star of Alpha Centauri. The Royal Geographic Society used this as proof of their theory that the signal received decades before was merely a scrambled signal that arrived in the Commonwealth after passing through a star and had no hallmarks of intelligence at all. The RGS established the first interstellar outpost in the Alpha Centauri system in late 2203, further proving the worth of the society. Their intent was clear: to expand the Commonwealth by installing a base of operations in the system, from which further expeditions would be planned, including research and survey missions to the habitable planets. An alien archaeology site was discovered on the fourth world in this system later the same year. Records found on the surface pointed to a weapons cache whose power far exceeded contemporary armaments. Parliament voted to find the weapons on Alpha Centauri 4, with the Knightly Order of Bushido tipping the balance. The ayes won a majority. "One small step for me, one giant leap for economies everywhere," so stated the King in front of over 1 billion live viewers at the end of 2203, at the public opening ceremony of the first permanent outpost founded within Alpha Centauri. The outpost was constructed, of course, by the Royal Geographical Society, which they promised to be the first of many. Within a year of the construction of this first outpost, there followed the establishment of the first off-world colony. After years of looking to the stars, humans finally landed on an outer world to claim a new home, naming it Celtica. It might have taken a few centuries, but the British were once again expanding their empire with new colonies. Funding from the government was eagerly received and greedily spent by the RGS. Another habitable world in the Sirius system was discovered late in 2204. The Prime Minister happily took the applause for his figurehead role in expanding the empire. As a lot of effort was spent on our colonization of the stars, the supply lines on Earth were getting stretched thin. Complaints that certain luxury goods were becoming hard to find were the least of our worries. Most of the raw resources and components required to build the engines had become scarce on Earth. And as a lack of engines meant no spaceflight and no colonies, that then meant no expansion. Inflation rose, prices soared, and the standard of living for many declined dramatically. After generating a housing surplus, Parliament engaged in a slum clearance program to encourage more house-buying people into the system. Controversy followed after a leaked audio tape heard the king in support of the slums, catching him saying, "You just can't help these people," and "those slums were there long before me and will remain long after me." The king and Parliament argued about the need to remove slums, but once His Majesty worked out not everyone was able to live in a network of palaces and castles depending on the season, an agreement was reached. A new Globe Theatre opened the next year in 2205. It was modelled in the shape of a globe being held on the shoulders of Atlas, with the great bard Will.I.Am Shatner sat atop it at his writing desk made of marble. A true celebration of culture, and right in the heart of London, instead of in the rather grotty provinces where they don't understand and don't want such things anyway. Despite having been the founding imperative that drove the adoption of engines, it was found the next year in 2206, some 300 years after their adoption, that there existed jobs that could be made more efficient with engines instead of inefficient meat-based clerks. The Prime Minister immediately began working on an economic restructuring. In the middle of that year, the Knights of Bushido further strengthened their hold on Parliament, determined that Earth should have a mighty fleet. In response, the government switched from a balanced economic policy to a militarized economic policy. Celtica, the first off-world colony of the Commonwealth, was completed at the start of 2207, its creation having been aided by the great efficiency of engines. Thanks to the communications beacons of the RGS, allowing an interstellar livestream, people across Earth watched the official opening ceremony alongside the colonists, celebrating a truly monumental moment in the history of the Commonwealth, showing their ability to discover, expand, and prosper in the void of space. Society ascended in March of the same year. Humanity had never been so unified by a common goal: discovery of the great beyond. The magnificent effort by the whole of humanity was rightly rewarded with their technological ascendancy. August 2207, a date for the record books, when the last clerk became unemployed. Heralded as another great victory for the Applied Rationality Party, clerks were removed from offices for the second time in history. With influence from the king, all clerks had been eliminated, their bodies left rotting at their desks, lest we forget a third time. In 2208, signals from a possible intelligent civilization were detected in the Ecovera system, and translators from the Royal Geographic Society were sent to see if any message could be extracted. The Xenos were labelled as the Divas, a moniker given because of the signal's superficial resemblance to Sanskrit. Shortly after the signal was received, a space station of a spacefaring civilization was discovered in the Omega system. Only a few years after first leaving the borders of Sol, humans once again showed their prowess for expansion, colonising the third outer world of the Sirius system. Its name, Moistopolis, was heavily debated, as it was seen to spark indecent comments within different circles of the population. However, the Royal Geographic Society were nonplussed, having proposed the name because of the world's unusually wet climate for a continental planet. The Applied Rationality Party agreed and pushed Parliament to accept the name, which, with the party's backing, quickly gained track. Moistopolis was accepted as the colony's official name within the society, to much quiet giggling. Later the same year, First Contact. Intelligent alien life was found piloting their own spacecraft, or at least it was assumed to be their own. Xenophobic Dave suggested they had probably nicked it, which led to him being thrown into the brig, and new guidelines for hiring expedition members with dubious but known to be accurate nicknames were drafted. With Dave safely out of the way, a cautious radio exchange followed in an attempt to decrypt their communications. A second spacefaring civilization was discovered later the next year. The RGS sent some of their best scientists to further study the event. We once thought we were alone. Now we're beginning to not like the look of the neighbourhood. In a rare result, the vote having passed by more than 80%, Parliament was uncommonly in agreement to build more engines. The bill making the manufacture of AWEs a legal necessity for the prosperity of Earth and a civil right caused a rapid gain of influence by the Royal Computing Company. AWEs were to be made available for manual labour on all colonies. Much beeps of agreement filtered through the hallways of the totally human Parliament. Scientists from the RGS discover Trin's Promise, home to 3 candidates for colonisation, in March of the same year. The system had a low-light star and was named after the Society nobles Victoria, Elizabeth and Mary Trinidad, collectively known as the Trins. Prime Minister Christopher Bloomfield, a key researcher within Earth's engineering sector, was then elected Prime Minister in April 2210. Later the same year, a vote within Parliament decided that the public would be informed of alien life, a decision that backfired on the Royal Geographical Society, hoping to benefit scientifically and economically from their contact with other life forms, and greatly damaging their prospects for future expansion. What followed was a storm of media slander. The slander tried to undercut the funding of the RGS. Xenophobes were blamed without evidence, but it probably was them. Next, the Commonwealth met a great giant psionic entity, getting the year 2213 off to an interesting start. A bit too interesting, as it turned out, once it started hunting down our ships for sport, mercilessly chasing them and frying the brains of anyone over 5 foot 8 inches in height. Only the bravery of our shortest spacefarers got us away from the entity safely. We deciphered the language of the Votari Confederacy in May of 2213, allowing the Commonwealth to establish communications. A new civilization discovered, the first alien civilization, and finally, uncontroversial proof that humanity was not alone, that other space-age sapient life existed. Ekavira was designated a fortress system in response, and defences were built up, because maybe Xenophobic Dave really did have a point after all. In 2214, the King initiated first contact with the Codronite cartel, opening diplomatic relations with a second alien civilization discovered by the RGS in the far reaches of space. The King had a personal conversation with their Vice President, returning with a very full diplomatic pouch and sniffing a lot. The entirety of Parliament unanimously agreed that having His Majesty dealing personally with a cartel could only bring greater prosperity to Earth. The Votari Confederacy entered into a non-aggression pact with the Commonwealth, a reaction to rumours that they had been preparing for war in response to the fortification of the border between the two civilizations. The pact was named War, What Is It Good For in the Votari language, which was not only boring in translation, but also a 2-century-old reference that only one diplomat wearing vintage Converse trainers and carrying a vinyl record laughed at. This caused an extra day of negotiations to explain, to both sides, just what he found so funny. Our new neighbours, the Votaran and the Cartel, went to war in the middle of 2216. Xenophobic Dave was released from house arrest and promoted to captain of a frigate in the area. The general hope of the RGS was that by this appointment, things would work themselves out one way or another. We met the task managers. No one knows who this was a victory for. The Codronite Cartel, a corporate contact and personal friend of His Majesty the King, set up a branch office on Earth. Now trading on Earth, this put to bed the idea that aliens didn't exist, although they didn't really like dogs, especially sniffer dogs. Humanity guessed that was just one of the alien quirks. Next, the task managers engaged in diplomatic roles, but faced friction as scientists were eager to dismantle these strange diplomatic AWEs in order to learn from them. We still had no idea who meeting them might be a victory for. In a landslide vote at the start of 2218, Parliament decided to form an embassy. This was a true rebuke to the Commonwealth Independence Party, and finally, a grand victory for the Commonwealth Union Party. An alien ship from the task managers then found our home planet. It hovered over us, initiating communications and requesting permission from them to observe us and our ways. In return, the task managers offered to aid with the development of humanity's engines. It was considered enough of a benefit to ignore how inherently creepy the request was, with Parliament merely suggesting that people keep their curtains closed. During their observations of Earth, the task managers found our engines to be lacking and underutilized. They offered to help our research efforts to make our engines better and more useful across other aspects of our society, beyond just menial labour and computational tasks. A bill was passed in Parliament to sign a research agreement with these task managers. However, in a diplomatic incident, a fanatical member of the ARP attempted to break into the containment area to study these strange analytical engines. A leaked transmission between our king and the engine-like task managers had the king openly dismiss the state of our own engines to the alien engines' faceplates. Only after the task manager envoy suggested potential advancement and cooperation of research did the king acknowledge that our technology, which had brought us to the stars, could be used for more abstract purposes like art. This notion insulted many members of the Applied Rationality Party. In 2221, the cartel was found to be involved in criminal conduct on Earth. The Codronites had fostered a criminal underworld via their branch office. They used it as a smuggling port for off-world narcotics and weapons. Loud voices outside Parliament questioned whether the king and the Prime Minister were failing the citizenry, letting in aliens who openly called themselves a cartel. In response, Parliament increased spending on crime reduction and called for a strongly worded letter to be drafted. "That ought to do it, sure," was the call from outside Parliament. 2 months after their victory with the strongly worded letter, the Green Party then convinced Parliament that defence was the best offence. The owner of the sarcastic voice outside Parliament offered their apology. The king delivered another strongly worded letter to the cartel at the start of 2223, which royal commentators resolutely denied looked like a bundle of cash in an envelope. After another strongly worded letter was delivered in that August, the Codronites replied by bribing officials. When asked how they would report this, the officials said, "What bribes?" and tapped their noses. This caused mass stability issues. The Order of the Drake was met in 2224. Will the Commonwealth Independence Party or the Commonwealth Union Party dictate this new relationship? The Order of the Drake demanded a massive payment in exchange for a human embassy, or just give us your stuff. In a rare concerted joint effort by the Commonwealth Independence Party, the Applied Rationality Party, and the People's Union Party, Parliament refused to give in to these unfair demands, not wanting to spend money on aliens instead of their own people. The task managers communicated with the Greater Commonwealth in May of 2225 to reveal they actually originated from Earth, and that they were in fact humans from thousands of years in the future, under the rule of the House of Windsor. Although this was obviously a lie, probably owing to an analytical error, it did sound like the kind of fart-smelling weirdness that only a Windsor would say. Parliament worked to secure a better food supply in the August of 2226, after several parties had to be cancelled due to a lack of tiny sausages and Scotch eggs. A trade agreement of 1,000 credits and 500 food per branch office with the cartel was approved by Parliament. Crime rates soared on all planets with cartel branch offices. Spearheaded by the King, Earth then ended diplomacy with the task managers in 2228, the King dismissing all claims about the supposed Windsor bloodline being alive and well in task manager space. Their having DNA evidence to back up their impossible claims was just taken as another insidious lie. The Votari Confederacy sent a diplomatic communication to the Prime Minister and the King with the intent to strip humanity of all diplomatic power through vassalization. The King used his executive powers to decline this offer by tearing up the proposal and making the Prime Minister swear to secrecy. Parliament were not informed. Don't ask me how I found out about it. The Royal Geographical Society joined in with their voices declaring the task manager aliens were not related to the House of Windsor, only 3 years too late. Bloody Johnny-come-latelys. The Codronites moved away from smuggling to illegal entertainment in 2229 after a puritanical government prioritised industry over entertainment. Steven Seagal Films enjoyed a brief renaissance as his bootleg DVDs hit the black market. On the first day of the New Earth decade, politicians from empires across the galaxy came together for the first time in order to form a galactic community, a supranational galactic organisation. And in their greatest legislative move to date, the PUP managed to convince Parliament to take funding away from the RGS to help feed the poorer citizens of the Commonwealth. The 2nd of June 2230, a great day for humanity. The nation known as the Circle of Nirvana became a great ally. Trade flowed across our borders, people migrated freely, and fleets from both sides would come to defend against any attack on these new freedoms. With a new wave of Pontifex Maximus destroyers in production in late October, the Green Fleet was officially renamed and the Pacifica Defense Fleet was founded. In the next year, the xenophobic fallen empire, health, happiness and hedonism was met. They did seem rather nice though. In an attempt to quash civil unrest on Earth, the King personally met with the biggest crime lords on the planet at the end of 2232. He spoke to stop the fighting between police and criminal forces. The deal was signed with gritted teeth, the King not wanting to go through with it at all. Almost a year later, the King conducted first contact with the Cardu, a much more positive appearance for the monarch. Unfortunately, when a Cardu diplomat barged into the King's diplomatic room and said there were voices in his head, King William VI, not understanding the psychic nature of the alien species, thought he was suffering from space madness and imprisoned the diplomat in a mental institution. The incident would later be referred to by his biographers as a bit of a gaffe. The King met the diplomat again a few weeks later in the hospital, where the rather large blundering communication was uncovered when it was understood that these voices were merely the collective consciousness of the people. Everyone had a good laugh, a cup of coffee, and communications were restored and an embassy established. At the end of 2235, the Vatari Confederacy and the Codronite cartel went to war. everyone hoped they might simply annihilate each other. In an astonishing result, however, Parliament voted in favour of supporting the Confederacy. What shape the help would take was unknown at the time. The Voltari-Kodronite War saw the Commonwealth aid the first alien civilization they had met, the Voltari. This grew largely from anti-Kodronite movements that had been festering over the previous 2 decades. Whether the support would see the relations improve between the Voltari and the Commonwealth, or would only be a means to an end in dealing with the Kodronites, remained to be seen. A choice of solutions was presented to the Parliament in 2236. As they would rapidly decay, the red, green or blue solution must be chosen on a timer. A translation of arcane deciphering on the box suggested that these were genetic serums that would greatly enhance the human species. Blue turned out to provide a limited regenerative property to the species, extending lifespans and allowing lost limbs to be recovered. Members of Parliament, however, were offered a concentrated version of this serum, effectively allowing them to live forever, which they took. Parliament became functionally immortal. The Commonwealth Unionist Party won a major victory over the Royal Geographical Society in 2237 to stop their expansionist policy, and instead start to work together with other species. A spokesperson for the society said, "But they're animals, Jim." A rumour circulated in the spring of 2238, with sources embedded within the newspaper Times of London claiming their so-called journalists had all been replaced by engines. Fed information to then spit out articles to be published on the dataway. Spokespersons for the Times of London made beeping noises before stating they were unavailable for commentary. Then, in a shocking act, the pacifist Green Party stood united with the Knightly Order of Bushido, who together forced a declaration of war through Parliament, voting to expel the Kodronite cartel. Before the budget for the Emergency Military Act of 2238 had even passed the drafting stage, recruitment of troops was put out in every world. As the support for the act was so great, it was impossible to fail. Funding also passed to the RGS, which expanded the number of ships in active service. The Commonwealth Army and Royal Zeppelin Force were provided transport on new specialist RGS ships, the human race's first interstellar troop transports. In response to continued criminal activity on Earth and her colonies, the Commonwealth made an ultimatum to the Kodronite cartel to remove their branch offices. The cartel tried to deflect the Commonwealth's attempts at diplomacy, but failed to anticipate the warlike attitude of Prime Minister Gregory Cornwallis of the pacifist Green Party. A personal response to the continued production of waste by cartel branches on Earth and the millions left in deprivation, their lives used up in the illegal activities of the Kodronites. War were declared, both to prevent their ongoing perverse criminal practices and to protect the innocent and imminently conquerable Voltani. A crushing victory was won in the first non-simulation fleet engagement by the humans. Their fleet disabled the heavily armoured space station within the Vol system, freeing the capital planet of the Voltari Confederacy in the opening days of the Battle of Vol. The psionic Hufua arrived as refugees in late 2241, following their persecution in Drake's space. October 2241. The Battle of Wegmore. With their first incursion into Syndicate space, the human navy met a large enemy presence, with an armada and a station in the system. Understanding they had the upper hand, seeing the enemy fleet out of position, the human armada, led by Dantor Kalders, charged into the battle. The humans, though, had drastically underestimated cartel intelligence. The deals the crime lords had struck on Earth meant many sensitive files were given away, including fleet tactics of the RGS. This intelligence allowed the Syndicate fleet to hold steady against the human fleet despite being outnumbered. This angered Dantor, who began disregarding tactics. He considered their chances at an even 50-50, but when an enemy reinforcement fleet arrived in the system, Dantor finally called for a full retreat. Whilst a loss for the human forces, only 2 RGS warships did not manage to return home and were presumed killed in action, whereas 6 vessels of the cartel were destroyed in Wegamore. The media proclaimed this as a great victory. Following this supposed victory, Parliament voted to demand the cartel's unconditional surrender, as the general consensus was that, despite losses, we believed we could still win. The cartel, however, refused to surrender, instead asking for a return to the previous arrangement. However, behind closed doors, top-ranking officials with up-to-date information about the war were worried after the battle, or defeat, in Wegamore. All RGS ships were kept in Commonwealth space, defending the fortress on the Voltari border. Good intel indicated the cartel, in the wake of Earth's forces being repulsed, were now once more invading the Confederacy and on course for the capital, Vol. The task managers, though legally banned under Commonwealth law from contact with the Commonwealth, contacted the Commonwealth. They then demanded humanity cease hostilities with the cartel in the name of the preservation of life. King William VI had a few choice words to say about the war to the task manager representative. They are putting our children in the hands of drug dealers and smugglers and people smugglers. It is beyond reproachable. I have been to the slums of Nova Scotia, and I have seen with my own eyes the rampant crime there, the poverty and the misery, and anyone without a heart could not know what they are seeing, and clearly you have no hearts. 2243. Following a visit from a delegation of task managers to Parliament, King William VI died. Initial details were hazy, but it appears a Windsor claimant made some threatening remarks to the aged king, then wheelchair-bound and in a reported state of poor health for some time. The king challenged the Windsor claimant to a duel, the group proceeding to the Hyde Park dueling grounds, where the Windsor, in a sign of great disrespect, allowed his AWE manservant to fight in his place, a clear violation of Commonwealth law. After an exchange of fire, the smoke cleared to reveal the king had been killed. His son, Charles, quickly got involved and fighting broke out, at which point the Windsor fled. A delegate on his behalf lodged a claim that he was now the new king, Gregory XI, in direct opposition to Charles's own claim to the throne, disputing the outcome of the duel on the basis of its legality. The government of the Commonwealth is now in chaos. Who is the rightful king? Are the task managers now the Lords of Earth? Has a Windsor been restored? This concludes our analysis of the Age of Exploration for humanity in this timeline. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Commonwealth timeline.